So we started last week reviewing the translation and commentary of the RgVeda in The Secret of the Veda. And this is following immediately a series of talks on the Isha Upanishad. And the Isha Upanishad segues for Sri Aurobindo nicely into the commentary on the RgVeda, because at the end of the Isha Upanishad, the Vedic gods are invoked. In his commentary on both, there's a strong emphasis on mantra, on the power of the illumined word, inspired speech. And so this is especially important for understanding and using Savitri. The key to understanding and using Savitri is in this Vedic tradition. And Savitri is based entirely on this Vedic tradition, in principle, in meaning, in power, in purpose. Savitri is like the Veda in English. And Veda means truth. But this is truth truth of spirit, truth of the planes and powers of existence. And so this language is dealing with realities that ordinary language doesn't deal with. And therefore, there's a technique developed by this tradition, which is very old, at least 3,000 years, but probably 5. Of transmitting a vision of reality through speech, so that that vision is seen. It's not meant for the mind to analyze and relate to other things that are in experience. It's not that this knowledge isn't particularly relevant to thinking and experiencing life, unless one is doing a yoga of transformation. And then it's about experiencing life differently. And so the power of this seeing, hearing, transmitting stimulates a consciousness in us that is not the one that we have developed experientially. And it has very little to do with our conditioning, our education, and you know, our culture even, although it's a culture in itself, the Vedic tradition. So what we will hear in this commentary is this kind of information, understanding that sets the Vedic knowledge apart. Yeah. And it sets it apart in order to specify its purpose. And its purpose is to stimulate another way of seeing. And its purpose is not to stimulate thinking. The manas, the lower mind, the manas, which is our practical mind and our conceptual understanding, which we live according to all the time. That one is the one that's not being addressed. So then what is being addressed? The Shruti is a concept of knowledge and understanding and speech that is based upon intuition. But it's not your gut level intuition or your sort of ordinary, somewhat psychicized intuition. It's a higher intuition that is a direct grasp of the realities of things according to their spiritual meaning. The reality of things according to time and space and impressions and opinions and useful adaptations isn't being addressed by the Shruti. And we heard last time that this speech and these ideas address a certain transitional mind between the higher intellectual will, the will to universalize oneself, the will to illuminate oneself, the will to bring divine force into the mind and the life. That will is at the top of our intellectual range, known as the buddhi. And this word of the Veda is meant to stimulate a transition from that to what Sri Aurobindo calls overmind, which is a universal seeing of the energies and purposes behind things. So last week, the God that was addressed and which Sri Aurobindo told us is the fundamental one throughout the Veda, Agni. Agni was described as the energy of will. The energy of will in matter, in life, in mind, in overmind and supermind and the highest divine planes of Satchidananda. In all of those planes, the active principle is the will. And the name of that is Agni. So on one level, it means fire and heat. But on another level, it means inner being and purpose. And so it was said, actually, in the commentary last week that this is the principle of the psychic being, what Sri Aurobindo and the Mother have identified as the psychic being. In us, we have a physical being, a vital being, a mental being, and behind all of those, there is a psychic being that is said to be vast and free. It is unconditioned. So it is a projection from the absolute self-existent being of the universe in every individual thing. Every individual thing in time and space, from atoms to organisms, comes into being and becomes what it is by the will in it that is its truth, its self, its essential self. And that essential self comes into contact with the world. And so in phenomenology, there's this understanding that the individual is creating itself all the time in relation to the world. But it's not creating itself in response to the world. It's creating itself from within. And that energy from within, according to its type and its purpose, then encounters environmental conditions and adapts to them and causes them to adapt to it. And so these inner beings are meeting each other through the external world, and creating a constantly changing world of relations. Therefore, behind all the relations, there's this essential self of things. And we heard in Savitri a few weeks ago that the power of Savitri is, for one thing, a power in us that can enable us to see and feel as if directly in kinship with even material objects, because they have a self-existence, which we normally don't see because we're very utilitarian. But the carpet has a soul, and the pillar and the pipe and the cloth and the leather and the flowers and the human beings, all of these entities around us are alive in a way that is more alive than our normal senses usually perceive. So this transition from the manas, the sense mind, and the practical mind, and the conceptual mind, upward in the sense of more impersonal and more refined consciousness. This transition is effected by the mantric word, which is a power that's coming from a seeing mind. And that seeing mind has a speech facility that our ordinary conversational speech mind doesn't have. Although it is effective, and we create things in the world all the time through speech. But this particular level of creative speech is generally used for this purpose, this transformational purpose. And so it's not for everybody. It's for those who have that will to transform consciousness into something else. And so that will is called Agni, and that speech is called Savitri. Savitri is the emanation of the overmind, the top of the overmind, the principle of Vijnana, Surya in the Veda. Surya is the god of absolute truth, and that force of absolute truth in existence projects itself in the form of inspired, illumining speech. And that the body of that speech is known as Savitri. And Savitur, in the Veda, it's sometimes masculine and sometimes feminine. So we'll hear that in the text today. We'll get to know more about Savitri by hearing this Vedic text. And that's the main reason why I want to spend a few weeks with this text. Because we are a center for using and understanding Savitri. And one of the things that we have difficulty with in this center and in every center that I've been to is that this idea of a kind of speech which has another power and another purpose than ordinary speech is not a concept that people are familiar with or understand, because our culture just is text-based, mainly. We're print-based, and more that print comes in the form of voices behind pictures on the screen, and very severely clipped text that goes along with a kind of diagrammatic code, and we don't even know the code that's actually behind that. But media communication is based on code, and code is basically written language. And this Vedic speech is not that at all. So there's a faculty of transmission from higher planes of universal consciousness through the speech organ that doesn't use text and it doesn't use thinking. So we don't know much about that. And therefore, we're constantly reading Savitri with our eyes, as if we were reading a text. And this is not Savitri. Savitri is sound, and it is sound with a certain force. So the written text is like sheet music. It's meant to be transformed into sound. On the flat page, it's pretty meaningless. So we had a reading this week from Savitri that I personally found entirely meaningless. But I could follow what people were reading. People were reading it out loud. And you can follow the words like that, but you can tell when you're hearing it that the voice that is speaking it isn't really in having a grasp of what's being read. It's like there's a reflection from what's being read back to what the eyes are seeing. And there's this constant exchange going on between the eyes and the voice, from which the mind assumes that it's going to derive some sense. and it does to a certain extent, but it's not on the level of the speech transmission, because we've learned how to read without expression and quickly and to make mental associations, and we expect to get something out of that. And then when we do get something out of it, we think we've got it, but it's not it. But we're very good at convincing ourselves that what we've got is enough it for it to have some meaning. And so then we can go on to the next page. So in that process, we are losing a lot with respect to what it is. We are mediating it. So in phenomenology, this idea of mediated understanding is a common idea. And it's our habit, it's our training. So one of the barriers that we have to get through if we want to enter into this yoga of transformation of Sri Aurobindo is this barrier of language. And because this yoga is about the transformation of ordinary mind into supermind, it requires a focus of energy on the level of higher mind, which is not, it's mainly the level that philosophers dwell on. So ordinary people in their ordinary pursuits rarely touch that which is even meant to be transformed into something else. And so Sri Aurobindo's yoga has a relatively limited following because it does require a willingness, a voluntary appreciation of a range of possibility in one's spiritual development that even most spiritual traditions are not focusing on. And so that's why there aren't sort of practices and rituals and mantras that are used conventionally, but there are practices and rituals and mantras that are subtler and more powerful. So to figure that out and to be engaged with it requires a pretty extraordinary effort. And the whole commentary that we heard last week was exactly about that. You know, do we have the will to actually do that? Because that's the essential thing. And the other essential thing is the receptivity to that word, which is of that will, for that purpose. So the word from above and the will from below, these are the two principles of the yoga of transformation, actually. I would like to just make a personal comment too. I sent out to a lot of people some poetry of mine, and yesterday. And I need to apologize to some people to whom I had already sent some of that recently. And unfortunately, you're getting it twice. But I decided that I wanted to send it out to more people, and I wanted to include something that was not in the first small group of poems and recipients. So I enlarged the number of poems and the number of recipients. And unfortunately, this means that a lot of people got some of it twice. And I will not do that again. But why did I do it this time? I have to address that. It's in this context of the Veda and the idea of transformation. In those poems, which I selected from a lot of different periods of time and mainly focusing on poems about the mountain, I think that we can see a principle at work in this poetry similar to the one that we're going to hear about the Vedas today. And that principle is that nature imagery is used to convey and first of all to subjectively experience psychological and spiritual states that are reflected in some way, metaphorically primarily, in actual natural things. But the poetry is not about so much those natural things as about the psychological states that somehow have an affinity for these natural phenomena. So, for example, the mountain, for me, is a stillness. And it's a stillness to which I return frequently. And it is really a stillness, this mountain. And of course, mountains are like that. But this mountain has a certain relationship with sky and snow and trees and valley that allow it to resonate with a particular unique quality. And so I identify with that, and things like sunrise over the mountain and snow melting and rivers flowing. For me, all of these nature spirits, I call them, have a relationship with the mountain that is similar to the relationship that I feel between the inner stillness and the inner self of things. So this Purusha and Prakriti aspect of yoga philosophy for me is very accessible and obvious in relation to the mountain. So I've included a few poems about the mountain for that reason. And also the poems about the little warrior who finds the silent highway. The little warrior in this poem is exposed to things like global warming and pollution, environmental pollution, and the large number of homeless people and prisoners and refugees, and all of these things in the world today that we find it quite convenient to ignore in our little hermitage on the mountain, but which are actually very powerful realities. And I've been studying a philosopher named Timothy Morton, who who graduated in literature from Oxford, and now he is a philosopher. So he has a very unique talent for expressing profound philosophical ideas in very poetic language. And he really makes you feel what global warming is about. And it's bad. And what nuclear radiation is about, and it's bad. And so when we look at these things philosophically, they have a badness that even our scientific and journalistic understanding doesn't even approach. So I noticed that in this poem, this little warrior who confronts all of that is the psychic being coming forward to try to transform these impossibles into some other future. And someone who read this poem sent me a message saying, I see that this, immediately I can see that this represents the psychic being coming forward. And in this poem, the psychic being ascends to a plane of light and force, and then comes back down into ordinary life and really deals with it effectively. So those poems that I wrote about the light on the mountain and entering into the streams and into the depths and so on, is like this coming back from a higher plane to purify and change the things that are happening on the earth, which probably we can't purify and change. But the idea that it would be nice to do that, is something that we feel. And so then the question for yoga is, when we ascend from our ordinary state of helplessness, more or less, and frustration, to that universal consciousness, and that luminous power of Savitri is descending in our consciousness, this we can do, then what is the potential of that yogic phenomenon with respect to the situation of the world? Does it really represent something more than a spiritual experience? we know that in Sri Aurobindo's yoga philosophy, the idea is that this is an evolutionary process and that a new consciousness is evolving, and these Vedic methodologies can be used to enhance that evolutionary process. So this is added value. The Vedic yoga was always useful for spiritual experience. Now, according to Sri Aurobindo, it's also useful for evolutionary progress. So we call this an evolutionary yoga. But we don't yet, as a segment of humanity that's aware of all of this, we don't yet have a very tangible grasp of what the effect of our yoga could be. And if we look around in Crestone, we're a dozen people, and there are a dozen other groups of a dozen people who do their thing. And in the world, the disciples of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, maybe amount to 10,000 or less. And so there's, for me, there's a contrast, a kind of irrepressible sense of possible impossibility, hope, sometimes real, tangible luminosity and presence of possibility, which disappears about as quickly as the snow on the mountain, which I'm writing about. So I set out these poems because they put together this kind of romantic vision of transforming the world with personal, individual ecstasies based upon nature, and this teaching of the Veda, which I've been publishing in the Eagle, so there are lots of articles that are there. And that represents a segment of my orientation and experience at this point that I just felt like sharing because it fits into this niche of studies that we're doing, and also because I was transferring a lot of data from that computer to this computer, and I was looking through all of these texts, and I said, well, why don't I just select some things here that really, for me, represent what we're doing on a personal level. So that's why I sent out those poems. And
I have a question.
Yeah.
How I'm struggling with the tendency of kind of like longing for that ability for other people to see things that I've experienced and that I see, and feeling alone and knowing that the majority of people haven't experienced that. And I guess how, because I've realized that I can't, especially because of many things, I need to step back and not feel connected with other people's paths of illumination or whatever, where they're at in their path, and trying to teach them or like express things that I'm seeing. And
I have this problem all the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, especially as a teacher.
with I mean, that's what I was saying about Savitri. I've been working with this yogic language and energy for almost 50 years.
Yeah.
And then I come together with a group of people who are more or less just beginning, and I think, is it really going to be possible to open this or to move it forward in a way that is meaningful? Yeah. Or are we just all of us in our own little karmic slot, and some things we can do and sometimes things we can't do, and I think that is true to a large extent. The human species is extremely diverse.
Yeah.
All you have to do is stand in the airport at Los Angeles for half an hour, and you'll see right there 1,000 people who are completely different from each other. And that's why human beings have survived so well without speciating, because we can adapt to every possible environment on the earth, and not just adapt to it, master it. And so the human species hasn't had to speciate, because it's so completely adaptable. But that also means that we are infinitely diverse. And each one of us represents a uniqueness with certain, general species similarities, and experiential similarities, and cultural similarities, and within a community, we basically think all the same thing and do all the same things, and so it's very hard to move beyond that common denominator of a community or of a society or whatever, and developmental psychology is about that. Ken Wilber's work is a lot about that.
Yeah, it's hard when it's especially with people you love a lot too. Like, I don't know, for me,
Right.
It's especially with my family, I struggle being near them.
I had to be away from mine completely for 10 years before I could talk to them.
Yeah.
When I got to a certain point of my own individuality. So we're individuating too, which is another, common psychological factor of the human species, where we think that individuation is like the real substance of being human. And so if we're all self-sufficient and proud of it and successful and to hell with everybody else. But what we're looking at here is an evolutionary spiritual idea that has a power that is the result of yoga, that conceives of, and not just conceptually, but literally conceives, a transition for humanity, starting with very small, concentrated individuals and groups, but nonetheless, a possibility for the emergence of another humanity, which has the power to transmit its clarity and its beauty and its visions quite easily, because it is attuned to everything else in a way that the human individual is not. We base our lives on difference, but this new humanity bases its life on sameness. And all the differences are just expressions of that sameness. So in philosophy, this is not an unknown idea, but in life, it's something difficult to achieve still. But then the idea is that if a significant portion of humanity endures that transition from individuality to universality on the basis of its uniqueness, actually, a very high level of uniqueness, then from that new humanity, there could emerge another species, period, other than the human species. So this is seen by Sri Aurobindo as a gradual process that proceeds according to intention, according to a well-defined purpose and practice. And we're in the process of being initiated in that purpose and that practice. have no doubt about it. But if it's not for you, you know, there are plenty of paths, and we have them all around us here. But this one has been initiated by Sri Aurobindo and the mother in a way that's very tangible. So now we're going to feel it, we're going to hear it, we're going to feel it, we're going to know what it is, and then we have always the question, do we have the will to move forward with it? And what does it take then? And then one has to really seriously look at that. Because if you have the will for it, then you need to know what it takes to achieve it. And with respect to Savitri, one of the things that it takes is that we get completely beyond our mental limitations with respect to reading and understanding and all of that. I mean, we have to really move that language faculty forward to the level of Vedic truth consciousness, so that the power of speech is conveying the truth of the idea, and that's achieved. When the power of speech is conveying the truth of the idea, then it has an effect on oneself and others. But otherwise, before that, we're just, you know, dabbling in the library or something. So this Savitri, you know, this is our main resource. The main resource for yoga is this book called Savitri. But it's not a book called Savitri. Savitri is the power of enlightened speech. So we're going to hear about that now. Sri Aurobindo began all of this with the hearing, seeing faculty that he was gifted with, and unlocked the secret of the Veda. And the secret of the Veda is this illumined mind and speech. So the next hymn that I wanted to explore today is titled, of all things, Surya Savitri. And one of the things about Sanskrit that I suppose, I'm not a Sanskritist, but I suppose that is helpful in this regard and very special, and we heard this a couple of weeks ago, that a series of nominatives, names, representing different gods is stated and heard. For example, we heard that one, Pushan, Kavi, Yama, Surya, Vyuha. So it, you know, all these four gods are stated, and then draw together your rays. Vyuha, Rajamsi. There's a verb at the end. It follows all the names of all of these gods, and they turn out to be not really separate. They're all powers of the same universal energy. So we hear that in the Veda with regard to Surya, Savitri, Soma, Agni, especially those four. And I have a tantric text here, which is very, very wonderful one called the Lakshmi Tantra, in which we hear all of these mantras of the names of the gods who are all rays and emanations of Mahashri, the Lakshmi, the Divine Mother. So Savitri is a ray of the Divine Mother. We know that from reading Savitri. She is also a ray of Surya. So the Divine Mother is above in the hierarchy at the top. She is the force of the Supreme. And from her emanate all of the gods. And the particular ones of the Veda that we hear again and again are Surya, Savitri, Soma, and Agni. Agni is the fire of aspiration. Soma is the delight. Savitri is the illumination. And Surya is the absolute quality of being itself. The Lord of knowledge, but knowledge in this case means the being of things. So the being of things has to be initiated in the cosmos. And that force of initiation is called the Word. And then that force of initiation takes qualities, becomes qualities, forms, soma, delight, forms of delight. All the different colors and intensities of being are forms of delight. And what sustains them, what allows them to have substantiality is Agni, or energy. So every photon that emanates in every particle in the universe is about sight. And from the original emanation of photons, there evolve all of these species that have infinite varieties of organs that receive visual impressions of things. So there's no difference between the molecular elemental substance of the universe and the qualities that are embodied by things and the organs of sense that perceive the qualities of things that emerge from the energy of the universe, because it is all just one self. So this is the Vedic understanding. So I'm going to chant to some extent, read the hymn, and then I'm going to read the commentary. And I'm going to comment a little bit on the commentary and facilitate some understanding of this Vedic secret. Men illumined yoke their mind, and they yoke their thoughts to him who is illumination and largeness and clear perceiving. Knowing all phenomena, he orders soul the energies of the sacrifice. Vast is the affirmation in all things of Savitri, the divine creator. All forms he takes unto himself, the seer, and he creates from them good for the twofold existence and the fourfold. The Creator, the supreme good, manifests heaven holy, and his light pervades all as he follows the march of the dawn. In the wake of his march, the other gods also reach by his force to the greatness of the divinity. He has mapped out the realms of earthly light by his mightiness. The brilliant one, the divine creator. And thou reachest, O Savitri, to the three luminous heavens, and thou art utterly expressed by the rays of the sun. And thou encompassest the night upon either side, and thou becomest by the law of thy actions the Lord of love, O God. And thou art powerful for every creation, and thou becomest the increaser, O God, by thy movings, and thou illuminest utterly all this world of becomings. Shavashva has attained to the affirmation of thee, O Savitri. The twofold and the fourfold generally represent the knowledge and the ignorance. That is to say, the immutable being and all of its multiplicity of forms. That's the twofold. The fourfold are the planes of that duality: physical, vital, mental, and truth being, vijnana. So there are four planes of manifestation: the physical, the vital, the mental, and the universal principles. And together they embody this duality of the unmanifest and the manifest, the unity and the multiplicity. And the unity and the multiplicity are not separate, they are one. The one embodies itself in the multiplicity. That's what I said that a minute ago. So, Indra, who is the god of illumined mind, our mind going beyond intelligence to illumination. He takes care of that for us if we really want to get out of the mind and get into the light. Then we're invoking Indra. Indra with his shining hosts, the Maruts, and the Maruts, Sri Aurobindo translates as powers of mentality, like inspiration, intuition, aesthetic taste, ethical knowledge. These are Maruts. Indra with his shining hosts, the Maruts, with Agni, the divine force, fulfiller of the Aryan sacrifice, are the most important deities of the Vedic system. Agni is the beginning and the end. This will that is knowledge is the initiator of the upward effort of the mortal towards immortality. To this divine consciousness that is one with divine power, we arrive as the foundation of immortal existence. Indra, Lord of Swar. Swar is the plane of overmind. The luminous intelligence into which we have to convert our obscure material mentality in order to become capable of the divine consciousness is our chief helper, Indra. It is by the aid of Indra and the Maruts that the conversion is effected. The Maruts take our animal consciousness made up of the impulses of the nervous mentality, possess these impulses with their illuminations, inspiration, intuition, aesthetic taste, and creativity. The Maruts take our animal consciousness made up of the impulses of the nervous mentality, possess these impulses with their illuminations, and drive them up the hill of being towards the world of Swar and the truths of Indra. Our mental evolution begins with these animal troops, these pashus. They become, as we progress in the ascension, the brilliant herds of the sun, Gavaha, rays, the divine cows of the Veda. Such is the psychological sense of the Vedic symbol. But who then is Surya, the sun? from whom these rays proceed. He is the master of truth. And truth in this case doesn't mean truth of thought. It means truth of being. Things are what they are according to their purpose and destiny and essence. So this is what truth means. It's not what we think about something. It's what something actually is. And not what it is just temporally, but what it is potentially. Surya is the master of truth. Surya, the illuminator. Savitri, the creator. Pushan, the increaser. So these are one. Surya, Savitri, Pushan, Kavi, Yama, Agni. These are one being whose rays have these different names, but they are all rays or powers of the truth of existence. So this is something that happens in the Vedic Sanskrit, where these names of powers and principles just get strung together, and then they each get a slightly different quality and flavor and purpose, so that we can think about illumined speech separately from the fire of aspiration, but actually the fire of aspiration creates the illumined speech, and so on. His rays, in their own nature, are supramental activities of revelation, inspiration, intuition, luminous discernment, and they constitute the action of that transcendent principle which the Vedanta calls Vijnana, the perfect knowledge, the Veda Ritam. Ritam means right. So the truth and the right are one thing. But these rays descend also into the human mentality and form at its summit the world of luminous intelligence, Swar, of which Indra is the Lord. So Surya steps down to Indra. Indra is the potential for illumination in the human mind, and Surya is the source of that illumination. And these are not just images or symbols, they are realities. They exist eternally. For this Vijnana is a divine and not a human faculty. Man's mind is not constituted of the self-luminous truth, like the divine mind. It is a sense mentality, manas, which can receive and understand truth, but is not one with it. The light of knowledge has to present itself in this human understanding, tempered so as to suit its forms to the capacities and limitations of the physical consciousness. And it has to lead up progressively to its own true nature, to manifest successive evolutionary stages for our mental development. Therefore, the rays of Surya, as they labor to form our mental existence, create three successive worlds of mentality, one superimposed on the other: the sensational, aesthetic, and emotional mind, the pure intellect, and the divine intelligence. So manas is sense mind and emotional mind. Pure intelligence is buddhi. And the divine truth mind is vijnana. The fullness and perfection of these triple worlds of mind exists only in the pure mental plane of being, where they shine above the three heavens as their three luminosities. But their light descends upon the physical consciousness and effects the corresponding formations in its realms, the Vedic Partivani Rajamsi, earthly realms of light. They also are triple, the three earths, mind, life, and body. And then the three planes of higher mind, and then the three planes of absolute self-existent knowledge, power, and bliss. So there are three levels of three in this particular cosmology. There are others. Last week we heard about the seven planes. But what happens with the seven is that the higher three gets isolated from the middle, and then there are the lower three. So the Vijnana is in the middle, the Satchidananda is above, and the triple world of mind, life, and body is below, so then it becomes seven. So the nine becomes seven with a slight cosmological shift. And even the nine can become 12. But we won't be going into that right now. All of these worlds, Surya Savitri is the creator. So the truth conscious being, Surya, creates all the worlds by the mediation of the divine word, Savitri. We have, he says, in this figure of various psychological levels, each considered as a world in itself, a key to the conceptions of the Vedic rishis. The human individual is an organized unit of existence which reflects the constitution of the universe. It repeats in itself the same arrangement of states and play of forces. Man subjectively contains in himself all the worlds in which objectively he is contained. Preferring ordinarily a concrete to an abstract language, the rishis speak of the physical consciousness as the physical world, earth, bhu, prithvi. So in the Gayatri mantra, it begins with Om Bhur Bhuvaha Swaha Tat Savitur. So there we get Bhur is the physical, Bhuvaha is the vital, and Swaha is the mental. So you hear this Gayatri mantra in all the Hindu sects these days, but it's there in the Veda. The Gayatri mantra itself is in the Veda 100 times. So this oldest understanding of the planes and the gods in the Vedas is the one that animates Hindu religion today. Not that most people know very much about all of that, but everyone sings Om Bhur Bhuvaha Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi. It's a very common mantra, and it comes from the Veda, and it means this that we're hearing right now. This knowledge that we're hearing is what that mantra means. These worlds, describe the pure mental consciousness as heaven, Dyaus, of which Swar, the luminous mind, is the summit. To the intermediate dynamic, vital, or nervous consciousness, they give the name either of antariksha, the intermediate vision, or of bhuvar, multiple dynamic worlds formative of the earth. So multiple dynamic worlds formative of the earth. The life principle. The life principle includes worlds of power, delight, harmony, beauty, and then those principles of that world, bhuvaha, create the biosphere, and all the infinity of species and flowers and processes. But they exist in principle in a world of pure principle, different from the world of elemental matter and different from the world of ideas. We can move out of our limited sense mind and become directly aware of that life world behind all the forms that we perceive. And then we can feel harmony and beauty and power in their pure self-existent divine self, and see everything that our senses perceive as expressions of that world of divine principles. If we transform the sense mind into the higher mind. This is necessary if we're doing a yoga that requires perfect equality to all things at all times. And perfect equality to all things doesn't mean being neutral or negative. It means simply not reacting to anything because you know what everything is in itself. So that's equality, the self in all and all in the self. That's a way of seeing things, but it requires stabilizing one's consciousness in that universal principle. And that can be achieved by practice. Then, how would we be? This is the interesting question. And so we need to refer to Savitri to find out the answer to that. In the idea of the rishis, a world is primarily a formation of consciousness and only secondarily a physical formation of things. A world is a loka, a way in which conscious being images itself. And it is the causal truth, represented in the person of Surya Savitri, that is the creator of all its forms, for it is the causal idea in the infinite being. The idea not abstract, but real and dynamic, that originates the law, the energies, the formations of things, and the working out of their potentialities in determined forms by determined processes. Because the causal idea is a real force of existence, it is called Satyam, the true in being. Because it is the determining truth of all activity and formation, it is called Ritam, the true in movement. Because it is broad and infinite in its self-view, in its scope, and in its operation, it is called Brihat, the vast. So this is another of those trinities that we hear often in this school of thought. Satyam Ritam Brihat, the truth, the right, the vast. That's a plane, that's a plane of existence from which all forms get their initiation. It is self-existent, omnipresent. Satyam Ritam Brihat is here now. And every temporal form is its expression. And yet it is vast and right and true in a way that no temporal forms can be. And here Sri Aurobindo is perfectly in line with Plato's thinking. The idea is a power of existence. So idea tu agathu, the power of the idea of good. Plato says the idea of good empowers everything to be what it is. And idea tu kalu is the idea of the beautiful. And it empowers everything to be proportionate and balanced and harmonious, at least at some moments in its arc. So this Platonic thinking and this Vedic thinking were very close in many respects. And Sri Aurobindo was a Greek scholar before he became a Sanskrit scholar, so he really is in tune to these ancient ways of seeing things. Savitri, by the truth, is the creator, but not in the sense of a fabrication or mechanical forming of things. The root of the word means an impulsion, a loosing forth or sending out. The sense also of the ordinary word for creation, Shristi, is, and so a production. The action of the causal idea does not fabricate, but brings out by force, by the pressure of consciousness on its own being, that which is concealed in it. Being brings out everything from itself. It is itself through force of being becoming in forms. So then we could experience that everything around us and in us is just an outgrowth of the self at every instant. And we are that. So then there would be no sense of separateness. Everything is a self-manifestation of the self. And the power for it to be that is this creative force, who is an emanation of itself. Savitri. By the pressure of consciousness on its own being, by concentrating, it brings out what is. Latent in potentiality and in truth already existent in the beyond. And Plato and Aristotle call that the final cause. There's the immediate material cause, there's the efficient cause, which is some action, like lighting the match. There's the formal cause, like this exists for the purpose of light. And there's the final cause, which is to be able to find our way to become what we have to become. We can't do it in the dark. So these four causes are Platonic, and it's a way of seeing that everything that exists has a purpose for which it exists, It has processes through which it goes, and it has contingencies of the elements and environments of which it is made. And all of those work together for things to become what they are through the pressure, the force of the satyam, ritam, brihat on things. Now, the forces and processes of the physical world repeat as in a symbol the truths of the supraphysical action which produced it. And since it is by the same forces and the same processes, one in the physical worlds and the supraphysical, that our inner life and its development are governed. The rishis adored the phenomena of physical nature as just symbols for those functionings of the inner life, which it was their difficult task to indicate in the concrete language of a sacred poetry that must at the same time serve for the external worship of the gods as powers of the visible universe. So the powers of the visible universe are seen by the rishis as the same as the supraphysical spiritual forces that they embody. Then the task in poetry is how to express the inner truth of things through the outer images. And this requires a special power of speech. Ordinary poetry doesn't usually get it. The solar energy is the physical form of Surya, Lord of light and truth. It is through the truth that we arrive at immortality. But not from the sun. From the sun, we arrive at bodies, plants, and animals. But the arrival of plants and animals at their truth is symbolic of the truth that we arrive at by an illumined seeing of the relationships of all things. It is through the truth that we arrive at immortality, final aim of the Vedic discipline. And immortality doesn't mean that you live forever. Immortality means that you feel and see and know those immortal truths of existence in front of you when you're actually seeing mortal things. Then you are in a state of immortality in consciousness with regard to things that are constantly coming and going. Your consciousness becomes immobile with respect to the truth of things, and it enhances actually all the comings and goings of temporal things. This is a creative consciousness, constantly creating itself, or constantly aware of itself creating in the world. It is therefore under the images of the sun and its rays, of dawn and day and night and the life of man between the two poles of light and darkness, that the Aryan seers represent the progressive illumination of the human soul. It is so that Shavashva of the house of Atri hymns Savitri, creator, increaser, revealer. Surya enlightens the mind and the thoughts with the illuminations of the truth. He is Vipra, the illumined. It is he who delivers the individual human mind from the circumscribed consciousness of self and environment and enlarges the limited movement which is imposed on it by its preoccupation with its own individuality. Therefore, he is Brihat, the large. But his illumination is not a vague light, nor does his largeness come by a confused and dissolved view of self and object. It holds in itself a clear discernment of things in their totality, their parts and their relations. Therefore, he is vipaschit, the clear in perception. Men, as soon as they begin to receive something of this solar illumination, strive to yoke their whole mentality and its thought contents to the conscious existence of the divine Surya within them. That is to say, they apply, as it were, all their obscure mental state and all their erring thoughts to this light manifested in them, so that it may turn the obscurity of the mind into clearness and convert the errors of thought into those truths which they distortedly represent. This yoking becomes their yoga. They yoke the mind and they yoke their thoughts, the enlightened of to, or so that they may be part of or belong to the enlightened. They yoke their mind and they yoke their thoughts to the enlightened, the large, the clear perception. Then the Lord of Truth orders all the human energies offered up to him in the terms of the truth, for he becomes in man a soul and sovereign power governing all knowledge and action. Not interfered with by conflicting agencies, he governs perfectly, for he knows all manifestations, comprehends their causes, contains their law and process, compels their right result. There are 7 of these sacrificial energies in the human being, one corresponding to each of the 7 constituents of his psychological existence: body, life, mind, supermind, bliss, will, and essential being. Their irregular action or wrong relation, caused and maintained by the obscuration of knowledge in mind, is the source of all stumbling and unhappiness, of all evil act and evil state. Surya, Lord of knowledge, puts each of them to its right place in the sacrifice. Knower of phenomena, soul, he arranges the sacrificial energies. So sacrifice in this case, as we heard last time, Agni being the will, the Lord of sacrifice, guides the behavior of life and mind and body towards this perceiving, this largeness, this impersonal, illumined way of being. And in order to do that, it burns up by its intention impurities and crookedness and ignorance. By calling the higher light into the mind, it changes the ordinary functioning of the mind into a more illumined, universal seeing. But if that call is not there, if there's not a burning of oneself towards that, if one doesn't reject the impulse to go to the movies and concentrate a little bit on elevating the intelligence, then one doesn't succeed. So that's the meaning of sacrifice. Effort, intention, redirecting of the mind, life, and body towards the universal divine truth and light and bliss. It requires at least a little bit of practice every day. So I'd like to have a 5-minute concentration break, if you like. And then I would like to end with a short reading from Savitri. I would like to see a show of hands if anyone feels a kind of pressure in the environment right now. So we know very well that the yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother has created this energy, and that when we invoke Savitri, this energy forms in the space. It's a given. Savitri is this ray of illumination, and in the yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, they have invoked this ray of illumination for a purpose. Yes, it brings peace and clarity and has the qualities of the Vedic mantra, which we will hear. But more than that, we know, especially from reading Book 4, that this force is looking for a ready human being to fully descend and manifest itself with its unlimited sense of creativity and beauty. And these cantos in Book 4 describe all of those possibilities of Savitri as a being, not just a ray of illumination. But in order to be fully, she needs a human vehicle, the ready human being. And in several of those cantos, it is said repeatedly that, you know, there are all these different levels and possibilities of creativity that human beings already embody, but they're far from that. So this goddess, according to this yoga and this teaching and this mythology, is there in the atmosphere waiting to be able to descend fully in a human being and not just to occasionally visit. So in this canto that was read by the group this week, it's the next book, and it's about the meeting finally after the divine goddess tours the whole world and all of the beings in it and explores the beauty and power of everything existing. She says, well, I still haven't found the one who's ready. And even the most ready are not ready. So then in this book, that sort of puts us in our place. Then in this next book, she finds finally the destined human being. And Sri Aurobindo calls this being Satyavan, the being of truth. And in this canto, where they actually meet, he narrates who the ready human being actually is, in case we want to know what it takes. And in his meeting with her, the goddess, she descends, and he is also able to narrate what it means for the ready human being to suddenly become something entirely different than what he already achieved. So we get a description of this vertical relationship. And when we're reading it, just reading it, like ordinary human beings, it sounds like there's some kind of horizontal relationship happening. But we know better than that. And Sri Aurobindo says many things in the canto to remind us that this horizontal meeting of the human and the goddess is actually about a vertical transformation. So we need to use our mind a little bit here to discriminate, to discern what is story and what is definitely not story. It's revelation.
It's specifically our mind that we don't need to use to understand that.
We need to use our mind at the top of its capacity to have a will to not be drawn in by the apparent imagery, but to be open to what's really being said. Not what our mind thinks is being said, not what our mind reacts to as a familiar possible scenario, but to really hear what is being said. This is the trick. So I'm going to read a part of a canto in which I think that what we hear should be a description of what it takes to receive the descent of the goddess in us and what it means in terms of our experience if it happens. So it's like a seed. You know, mantra means seed. That when we hear these things, they plant in us a possibility that wasn't there in us before. And we can feel it. Then, as we heard last week, the trick is to remember it. So this canto is called Satyavan and Savitri. And as I have said so many times, it's not about a guy and a chick meeting in the forest.
So this specific canto is called, is the whole book a canto then?
No, there are 49 cantos in the book,
Oh, wow.
divided into 13 books
Within that one book.
within this volume, yes. And so the different sections have different meaning. We're moving towards a workshop in December that is about the third, based on the third part of this. The central part, there's a part 1, there's a part 2, and a part 3. And these are all specifically organized to convey stages of yoga. And the last one is the stage of death. Yoga in death. There's the yoga in the body with the goddess, and there's the yoga of the master yogi who brings her down. So these are the 3 yogas.
Okay.
So this one is sort of the beginning of, we're at the beginning of the middle part, the middle yoga, the yoga of Savitri, which is the yoga of the goddess in us. And only when we have the goddess in us can we have a conscious death. This is also the teaching of Tantric Buddhism. And when she is there, then things change. So we sort of feel a presence. We sort of feel a presence going into this. And it's quite possible that at the end of it, we will feel that presence becoming very concrete. Because that's what this word is supposed to achieve. So Savitri appears in the forest to Satyavan. And in order to be sure that this is the ready human being, she wants to hear from him what he's been up to. And so he says, I carved my vision out of wood and stone. I caught the echoes of a word supreme and metered the rhythm beats of infinity and listened through music for the eternal voice. I felt a covert touch. I heard a call, but could not grasp the body of my God. But could not clasp the body of my God, or hold between my hands the world mother's feet. In men I met strange portions of a self that sought for fragments and in fragments lived. Each lived in himself and for himself alone, and with the rest joined only fleeting ties. Each passioned over his surface joy and grief, nor saw the eternal in his secret house. I conversed with nature, mused with the changeless stars, God's watchfires burning in the ignorant night, and saw upon her mighty visage fall a ray prophetic of the eternal sun. I sat with the forest sages in their trance. There poured awakening streams of diamond light. I glimpsed the presence of the One in all. But still there lacked the last transcendent power, and matter still slept empty of its Lord. The spirit was saved, the body lost and mute, lived still with death and ancient ignorance. The inconscient was its base, the void its fate. But thou hast come, and all will surely change. I shall feel the world mother in thy golden limbs, and hear her wisdom in thy sacred voice. Sacred voice. I shall feel the world mother in thy golden limbs, and hear her wisdom in thy sacred voice. The child of the void shall be reborn in God. My matter shall evade the inconscious trance. My body, like my spirit, shall be free. It shall escape from death and ignorance. And Savitri, musing still, said to him, "Speak more to me. Speak more, O Satyavan. Speak of thyself and all thou art within. I would know thee as if we had ever lived together in the chamber of our souls. Speak, till a light shall come into my heart, and my moved mortal mind shall understand what all the deathless being in me feels. It knows that thou art he my spirit has sought, amidst earth's thronging visages and forms across the golden spaces of my life. And Satyavan, like a replying harp to the insistent calling of a flute, answered her questioning and let stream to her his heart in many-colored waves of speech. O golden princess, perfect Savitri, more I would tell than failing words can speak. Of all that thou hast meant to me unknown. All that the lightning flash of love reveals in one great hour of the unveiling gods. Even a brief nearness has reshaped my life. For now I know that all I lived and was moved towards this moment of my heart's rebirth. I look back on the meaning of myself, a soul made ready on earth's soil for thee. Once were my days like days of other men. To think and act was all, to enjoy and breathe. This was the width and height of mortal hope. Yet there came glimpses of a deeper self that lives behind life and makes her act its scene. A truth was felt that screened its shape from mind. A greatness working towards a hidden end, and vaguely through the forms of earth there looked something that life is not and yet must be. I groped for the mystery with the lantern thought. Its glimmerings lighted with the abstract word a half-visible ground, and traveling yard by yard, it mapped a system of the self and God. I could not live the truth it spoke and thought. I turned to seize its form in visible things, hoping to fix its rule by mortal mind, imposed a narrow structure of world law upon the freedom of the infinite. A hard, firm skeleton of outward truth. A mental scheme of a mechanic power. This light showed more the darknesses unsearched. It made the original secrecy more occult. It could not analyze its cosmic veil or glimpse the wonder worker's hidden hand and trace the pattern of his magic plans. I plunged into an inner seeing mind and knew the secret laws and sorceries that make of matter mind's bewildered slave. The mystery was not solved, but deepened more. I strove to find its hints through beauty and art, but form cannot unveil the indwelling power. Only it throws its symbols at our hearts. It evoked a mood of self, invoked a sign of all the brooding glory hidden in sense. I lived in the ray, but faced not to the sun. I looked upon the world and missed the self. And when I found the self, I lost the world. My other selves I lost, and the body of God, the link of the finite with the infinite, the bridge between the appearance and the truth, the mystic aim for which the world was made, the human sense of immortality. But now the gold link comes to me with thy feet, and his gold sun has shone on me from thy face. For now another realm draws near with thee, and now diviner voices fill my ear. A strange new world swims to me in thy gaze, approaching like a star from unknown heavens. A cry of spheres comes with thee, and a song of flaming gods. I draw a wealthier breath, and in a fierier march of moments move. My mind transfigures to a rapturous seer. A foam leap traveling from the waves of bliss has changed my heart and changed the earth around. All with thy coming fills, air, soil, and stream, wear bridal raiment to be fit for thee, and sunlight grows a shadow of thy hue, because of change within me by thy look. A foam leap traveling from the waves of bliss has changed my heart and changed the earth around. All with thy coming fills, air, soil, and stream wear bridal raiment to be fit for thee, and sunlight grows a shadow of thy hue, because of change within me by thy look. come nearer to me from thy car of light, on this green sward, disdaining not our soil. For here are secret spaces made for thee, whose caves of emerald long to screen thy form. Wilt thou not make this mortal bliss thy sphere? Wilt thou not make this mortal bliss thy sphere? Descend, O happiness, with thy moon gold feet, enrich earth's floors upon whose sleep we lie. O my bright beauty's princess, Savitri, by my delight and thy own joy compelled, enter my life, thy chamber and thy shrine. In the great quietness where spirits meet, led by my hushed desire into my woods, let the dim rustling arches over thee lean. One with the breath of things eternal live. Thy heart beats near to mine, till there shall leap, enchanted from the fragrance of the flowers, a moment which all murmurs shall recall, and every bird remember in its cry.